Yeah.
Go.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our third session in our Pathways to Inclusion CLE series. My name is John Wyas. I am the Associate Director at the Utah Center for Legal Inclusion, or UCLE for short. This is one of our CLE events we've done this year. It's actually it's our third session. We've done number 1 and 2. Number 1 focusing on our inclusion efforts in the state more broadly, with business, government, and nonprofit and those realms. And the second one was about what's going on in our law firms. Today we're going to be focusing more on recruitment, retention, and advancement. And we have guests here from the law schools, from our judiciary, and from representatives from our law firms as well. So we're excited to have you all with us in person, and many of you online as well. I will just beforehand just mention that we will have some time at the end for questions. And so we will, if you are online, feel free to drop some questions in the chat, then we will try our best to get to those toward the end of this session. And also I'll let you know that I think this was a point of confusion in some of our last sessions. This is scheduled for an hour and a half, just so you are aware of that up front. So we will get going. So I'm just going to go through. I'll start from down at the far end of the table and work our way back to introduce our panelists. First, we have Isabel Moreno, who is the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law. Next, we have Barbara Melendez, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging at the J. Reuben Clark BYU Law School. And then next we have Judge Dianna Gibson, who is a judge on the Utah State Court's 3rd District here in Salt Lake City at the Matheson Courthouse. Yes. And last of all, we have Tyler Buswell, who is a shareholder at the firm Kirton McConkie. So thank you all for joining us today for this discussion. So first of all, I just want to, we'll kind of work, I guess we'll go backwards now. So we'll work our way down. Feel free to answer this question, but also to give us any more background that you feel may be useful about yourself, your journey through your legal profession. We just want to start off by just going through, so what have been some of your recruiting strategies? How have those changed in the last 5+ years?
Yeah, so Tyler Buswell at Kirton McConkie. Other little additional background. So I'm on the board of directors at Kirton, and I've been on the board for 2 years, and I've been the chair of our hiring committee for the last 4 years. And in the 15 years I've been at Kirton, I've been involved in hiring sort of things sort of over and over. So have a decent understanding of what Kirton has done historically and what we're trying to do now and how we're trying to be better in the future. I would say, to answer the specific question of, how has Kirton's recruitment changed in the last 5 years? There's a few things we've done to sort of meet DEI goals that Kirton has had for a long time. And one of the clearest is we partnered with UCLE on having a diversity fellowship for 1L students at the University of Utah and BYU. And this is our 2nd summer of doing that. We've had 3 individuals come through that program, and it's been awesome. They've been just fantastic additions to our summer class, and they are essentially just part of our summer associate class, and that's been just wonderful. Another thing that we've done is probably it was right around the time that I became the head of our hiring committee, we started thinking about we hire most of our summer associates from BYU and Utah, and they're great candidates. But there historically have not been as many diverse candidates from those schools, and the number of diverse candidates coming from those schools don't always want to go to a big law firm. So you have some additional problems, and then the pool then becomes pretty small, that all of the big law firms are trying to get diverse candidates, and it's a really small pool. And just as an example, even last summer, this happened at BYU. we had, I think it was 12 individuals we were supposed to interview for our 2L class at BYU. And before we even had on-campus interviews, and we were there part of the first day of on-campus interviews, every diverse candidate, which was 3, had accepted jobs someplace else. Again, the pool is already small. And so the competition for good candidates that want to go to a big firm is really intense. So one thing Kirton has done is we still do Utah and BYU, and they are our main source of summer associates, but we now we do on-campus interviews at a number of good law schools outside of the state, because part of us to meet our diversity goals is we need a larger pool. Just the pool in Utah is not big enough. And so we have decided we need to expand that. And we are going to be a little more aggressive. And so the last couple of years, we've interviewed at a number of other law schools, and it's been really successful so far. So that's something we've done to sort of meet these goals just in the last couple of years.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dianna Gibson. So my background, I was with Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer for 10 years. And while I was there, I was part of the recruiting committee. And also, I would call it the informal entertainment committee. In addition, after that, I spent 10 years as in-house counsel for 2 publicly traded companies. I had both business and legal roles. And with regard to recruiting strategy, I won't talk very much about the courts at all, but I'll just focus on my in-house time. What I will tell you there in the right before I left, which would have been about 5 years ago, 4 to 5 years ago, there was a more intentional goal of recruiting. And when I say intentional, before when positions would open up, they would proceed on their ordinary recruiting, right? You'd get a bunch of applicants, they'd go through, interview them, and then they'd hire someone. About 7 years ago, they created the first DEI committee. And as part of that committee, we made several recommendations about what we could do to increase diversity at the company. And one of the things that we recommended, which was adopted by the board of directors, was implemented by the executive team, was that for every management level and every supervisory position, you had to have at least one diverse candidate as part of the pool. And so if your initial recruiting effort did not bring in someone that was diverse, and when I say diverse, it was pretty broad. It could have been lots of things. So this company that I was with was in the outdoor industry. So that's really, there's not very many women in it, not a lot of anyone who is a minority. So it's, not a lot of diversity. So if their recruiting efforts did not bring anyone that was diverse, and that diversity was pretty broadly defined, they would have to expand the pool. So the requirement was that your pool had to have someone that was diverse. In addition, we also put in place interview panels so that it wasn't just one person's decision. In addition, we also required that everyone who was going through the hiring practice had to take implicit bias training so that they were just aware of their implicit biases when they were making hiring decisions. So that's some of the more tactical things that we put in place at the company to sort of drive the effort to increase the pool and also attempt to equalize the ground when making hiring decisions.
I hope you can hear me without stumbling through this, but my name is Barbara Melendez, and I started with Kirton 155 years ago. It feels like I graduated from BYU in 1997, and fast forward a few years later, and I worked in corporate immigration, employment compliance immigration, and family immigration, and then eventually moved to a different firm, and then eventually moved to Bridget's Brand, also in Salt Lake. So my background has been primarily working at a firm, although I initially started as a corporate attorney for a company. And then in my various roles at those firms, whether it was as a shareholder or being on the board or the recruitment, I started to recognize in a very profound way, this lack of diversity that exists within our legal community. And it's not diversity for the sake of using that name, but diversity in all aspects, like not only of cultural, but experience, and certainly of race and ethnicity, but of gender and of disability and LGBTQ plus, of non-traditional attorneys who have started or chosen to do the law as a second career. And so that really created a space in my life to feel as though I had to be more actively engaged in promoting a sense of inclusion and a real diverse community that would be more representative. Because as you can see, even if we look around this room, you know, there's a lot of the same. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a reality. And it's just not only what Utah looks like, but really what the entire nation looks like in terms of what are the diversity aspects of the legal community. And it doesn't change very much state to state, some states more than others. So having laid out that background, I had a dear friend who was working at BYU, and she invited me to apply for this position. And it's been a real honor for me to do this. I'm still on counsel with Richards Brandt, a firm that I love, and I still love all my attorney friends at Kirton McConkie, but this is something I feel tremendously dedicated to. Having said that, the question is, you know, what recruiting strategies have changed in the last 5 years? I've been with BYU since 1920, yeah, 2020. It feels like 1920. 2020, and shortly after that, the pandemic hit. But as we look at what strategies were in play before and how those have modified, I think one of the most important strategies is to be more directed at what we're seeking and to be more present. It's not enough to send a letter to, you know, HBCU, like the historically Black colleges and universities. It's important to be there, to make those connections, to really show our desire to recruit students from all walks of life. We've been intentional with we have a program called World of Law, where we invite candidates or people from all walks of life to come, including students from the undergrad. And we have different panels and presenters that talk what their path was to the law. You know, the law for me was a part two. I did not start in the law. You know, I came to the US as a child from, you know, a communist country, and I was raised in the US since the age of 6, but I was an advertising executive. And then I paused and realized I really wanted to do something more than sell products, right? And so having done that, the law opened, it just opened the vision of the desperate need that exists within our society, our community, and obviously our country. So one is to be more intentional. 2 is to be really connected and more personal as we try to reach out to these different areas. 3 is to really look at applications from a much more holistic approach rather than exclusively GPA and LSAT scores, which granted, and I say this in full disclosure, half of us, if any of you here are from BYU, BYU grads, thank goodness for the work that these students have done after, because I don't know if I could have gone to BYU because the GPA and the LSAT scores are so high now. But as being part of the admissions committee, we look at that, and we also look at the candidate holistically. One of the things that has really opened the possibilities for some of these candidates who otherwise would qualify and be able to enter is money. Many of the students who are first generation or who are starting or have a family, or they don't have the money to go to law school. So I can't thank the law school enough for their efforts in trying to scholarship students or the Achievement Fellow program, which hopefully we'll talk about later, and the generosity of firms that have contributed and have created an opportunity for 7 students. Now we're going into class number 3 to have law school paid for so that they could actually have a means. There is no one strategy. This is not a one-trick pony, and it literally shifts and morphs every time we meet. But the intentionality of recruitment should never change. It's the method that we do. And I hope we continue to do so. And I hope as a law school and a legal profession, we see the promise and benefit to having a really diverse and varied professional legal community that can be much more representative of the community that as a whole that we live in. There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. As John mentioned, my name is Isabel Moreno. I'm with I'm the director for admission and financial aid at the university just not too far from here, University of Utah. In terms of course, it's difficult to follow, but I guess in more practical sense of what we've done, or just to highlight or illustrate what that may be, some of the touching points that Melinda covered, what that looks like for our institution, and how some of the things have changed for the law school in the last 5 years. Just broadly speaking, I can tell you that something that was not a part of the institution before, and that we've now it's become part of our regular programming, is that faculty and staff are now engaged in implicit bias training, which is important in part to consider the populations that we're serving, which are very broad in terms of spectrum and life experiences. Students also engage in these practices or in a session very similar to this during their orientation. That is also something new that has changed in the last 5 years. That wasn't part of our experience before. We think there's definitely a lot of value in that. I think it comes from a very non-offensive, very gentle place from trained professionals. I do want to add that caveat. Not everyone is prepared to have these conversations in a professional manner, and it's not their discipline, right? And so I think it's important when you have folks who are leading these conversations and these discussions that they are experts in their fields and have profound understanding of how this functions, and the delivery is so important. In terms of recruitment specifically, more so now than ever, we're engaging in outreach efforts with affinity groups, internal and external stakeholders that host events such as this, and of course, like the Weekly and the event that we co-host with them every year along with BYU. We actually were already participating in something like that and hosting it at the law school, but just a much more smaller scale and for a different audience group. And so it's actually really wonderful that that's expanded from even where we were at. But the reality is, in thinking about recruitment, folks start thinking about their careers way back when they're in elementary school. If we're engaging with just college students, we're not really doing our job, because that's not when they're starting to think about law school or this profession. For some, it might be born there, but we had also, the reason I mention that is because for a time, we also had a kids sport program that ran for quite a bit of time. And so that's kind of where that idea was born out of. And we're not necessarily hosting that just because of some logistical matters with the university, but that was absolutely one of the most rewarding efforts. And so what has taken now its place is that our faculty individually are engaging with institutions of like either elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, in different efforts, whether it be Justice Day or Constitution Day and things like that. And in that manner, I would also add, like, there are softer points that are not necessarily coming from our office, but like things like our Pro Bono initiative, where they're reaching out to the community, and that brings also a touch point for the university, right? It doesn't always necessarily have to come from from our admissions office to be, in a way, indirectly a recruitment effort, right? Does that make sense, right? If you're going out, you're getting your name out in one way or another, and so community members know or realize that they can come to these spaces where they're technically going to be receiving a service, but also bringing some face value to the university. We've of course also increased our development efforts, much like Melinda has indicated. I mean, the reality is that attending law school and enrolling in law school can be very, financially, it is a barrier to come to law school. And in fact, many studies show that that is the number one there, like one of the main considerations that folks take into account when deciding to actually end up enrolling in law school. The number one, if you're curious, is public interest in what that looks like for those individual institutions. But I see that more as a motivator, the impetus behind going to law school, rather than necessarily being something that puts into reality whether or not I am in a position to attend law school. And so broadly speaking, I would say that. Now we all kind of, I think, are aware of this impending SCOTUS decision that may come out this week, or I guess maybe potentially this week before SCOTUS adjourns. But that will, of course, have an impact in more of a nationwide efforts, except for those states where or the schools where the states have already adopted a race neutral admission practice in their evaluation. And so going to Melinda's point about employing holistic review process, though I wouldn't say that's necessarily changed. That's been our practice since I've been in admissions, which has been for at least 7 years. But I can tell you our applications will certainly get longer, because this is not something, some of the information that was volunteered in the past is not going to necessarily be elicited as naturally, I would say, as it was in the past. And so what do I mean? We're going to be making questions or posing questions about their first generation status, highest level of education attained by parents, grandparents. Even when where they attended high school, where is that going to in terms of that's focusing more on the resources or access to resources that the students or the applicants may have had, the number of hours they may have worked while they were in, the students, their family makeup. So it is, I would say, different. I grew up in a 2-family home. I have friends that they're one of 12, right? And so the dynamics and family responsibilities are potentially substantially different there. Any family obligations. So right now, one of the things we are hosting a 4-week enrichment program, and many of our participants are members of the Native American community, and they have obligations to their families to not just support their raising siblings, but they also have financial obligations to their families to support the family unit. And so that is very different when you don't have that financial obligation to your family. And so that also takes away time from these folks to dedicate time to study, right? And so when you have all the time in the world to prepare and you're still at like a 3.0, that's very different from someone with a 3.0 who's working full time, is also helping to raise children and their families. And so some of these questions will be likely coming out in our more recent iterations of our applications, and in part because we will quite literally, it's almost like reviewing an application without a name, without any content, because we will not be able to have access to some of this data the way we would before, and ISOTs that would depend on the school district's decision. And so that all will play a role in our recruitment.
All right, thank you, Isabel. That's something I failed to mention. That's one in preparation for this panel. We had kind of tossed around the idea of delving more deeply into that, the Harvard and UNC case, but since that's still in the hypothetical until Thursday, probably, we're not, and even then we won't have time to really delve deep into that. So we're not gonna touch on that, but we're just kind of throw that out. That I'm sure there will be at least probably several CLEs coming down the pipe to. Oh.
I think that you have already assumed what is the definition of inclusion and who you want to include. That's not bad because that's what our society has done. But I can tell you, I'm the first generation in law school, in university. I have a lot of children. I have them from 5 different continents. And they have the same kinds of problems, but they don't look like you. And right now, if you study high school, you mentioned high school, reaching out, it's the boys who are in trouble across this country. You know, I think that I endorse what you're saying, but I think that you have failed to define the universe of people who need to be included. And it has changed. It is not one shade and it's not one gender.
I'm actually glad you say that, because when we talk about inclusion, there's a presumption, very similar to what you may be making, that we are talking exclusively about a gender, a color, an ethnic group. But in fact, there's multiple aspects of people that are underrepresented in the professional community. And we're only referring here to the legal community, right? We're talking about people who have fought in war and are trying to come back. We're talking about those who are non-traditional. We are talking about people who, you know, their gender is not defined by the norms of male and female. We're talking about people with disabilities. We're talking about people who come from a religious background that is not the primary or religion in the state. That view of diversity is a greater view of belonging. What aspects of human nature and different life experiences are we failing to include, invite, and allow an opportunity to belong to the law school and eventually to the legal community as a whole? So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's really urgent that we not blind ourselves with a very narrow scope of who this community is.
Just real quick, just in the context of this question. So in the context of the male failure to thrive, which all the data is showing at the high school level, right? I mean, are the statistics bearing out with entrance of law school yet? I know, I mean, because I still think it's close to 50-50, right?
Yeah.
Male, female, but I know there's so much data on what's going to happen in maybe 10 years, you know.
I think you're looking at a longer perspective.
Yeah.
At least the law school right now, our incoming class is 50 plus 54 and then 40 something in the women. So we're still lower in the female category. So we have not seen a lack of male applicants, but law schools as a whole across the nation, as well as graduate programs, are seeing a dip in applicants across the board. So that includes law schools, medical schools, you know, MBA programs. We are seeing this generation not applying, and those numbers have dipped. So yes, are we going to see a dip maybe 5 years from now? I think we may. And it's a tragedy, you know, to see this and to see what's happening to young males as well. It really is.
I mean, I think we're just gonna see a dip. We've already reached the point where there's just lower undergraduate enrollment, generally speaking, and irrespective of any demographics, those numbers, we've reached that great cliff where my generation, for instance, just did not necessarily produce children the way the baby boomers did. And so we've reached that point. And so that's going to change the entire demographics, generally speaking. It has nothing to do with anything other than the numbers just don't pan out. And so what that looks like for schools, it is yet to be seen, because we're going through the very infant stages of that experience.
But you can see, Tyler mentioned it, like the competition is great.
Very.
And so.
Every big firm in town is
Exactly.
very, very competitive.
And
Absolutely.
the same is true for admissions. We could admit, you know, X amount of diverse candidates, and they've applied to 5 other law schools, and the other law schools are, you know, doing their wine and dine, maybe lemonade and dine, whatever it is, you know, but they're doing their song and dance, and they are looking for ways to pull those candidates because of the numbers in their direction. So competition is stiff. It really, really is very difficult.
I'll just add, so on that point about for the proportion to men to women, I know nationally, and we're not seeing it here in Utah, but it's 60-40 female to male as far as who's in law school. That's overall nationally, but we're not seeing that here in Utah yet, but it is trending higher for more women entering. But we're just, I don't know, we're not getting into this today, but then we're not really seeing that bear out as who's actually coming out and practicing law.
And where they're practicing.
And where they're practicing, yes. So there's a lot of data out there, and we're just, like I said, still in the infant stage, and we're not quite sure why it's happening and where everyone's going and why. So on that point, I think someone brought a similar question up, is if there's anyone else that wants to define like what you yourself or in your organization, how you define a diverse candidate. I think we've touched on that, but if anyone wants to add anything else before we move on, like what you kind of look at when you consider diversity, what is it you're looking at?
For us, it's the whole person, right? It is incumbent upon the applicant to tell us their story. And it is they themselves, the ones that in their minds define what diverse means. And unfortunately, going to this point, they've defined it like this, right? It has to be a person of color, it has to be a female, or someone who doesn't, as Melinda mentioned, necessarily identify within the binary system of gender identification, sexual orientation, right? It can be anything. One of the best diversity statements, if you will, that I've read as a reviewer is someone who was a white male who enrolled in a program that was the very first program in the country for their particular major. They have to be able to tell their story in an efficient way. That's the calling of the application. And so we don't define the applicant in the parameters that they're suggesting, because we understand that there are different life experiences, and it's incumbent upon the applicant to express that cohesively and concisely to the admission committee. And so it could be virtually anything. They just have to be able to articulate it right.
I think that's not only accurate, but it allows us to, I mean, we have diverse candidates who, but we have a student who is a rising 2L, who's a Coptic Christian, whose families were refugees from Egypt, and he just brings so much to the table in terms of experience and relationship building and, what his story is. We have someone who identifies as having a disability. We have somebody who is, a mother of 5 who decided to go back to law school. We have somebody who had already had a degree, and he is come back to the state of Utah, has had significant experiences in helping very underprivileged communities, and wants to go to law school and would be considered, middle age, and whatever that is nowadays, right? So the spectrum is really who you are and how you identify, and what are you bringing to the law school to elevate communication and life experiences. I think that's really when you have such diverse opinions, that's when law school just bubbles, that's when you start to think of things in a way that you had never thought of before, because you've lived inevitably, for most of us, in our own little personal bubble. And so I don't want to be that person that defines diversity as A, B, C. I want to be that person that defines diversity as something much bigger than these very restrictive measures of what you're bringing to the table.
Thank you. So I think we've talked about some of the challenges in recruiting, and this might fall more towards Tyler and also you, Judge Gibson. So what are some of the challenges now that we've found some of the talent? What are some of the challenges in retaining that talent, but also helping them advance?
Yeah.
So when it comes to the judges, I'll just say, I think all of you have a far greater impact on whether or not we're retained than anything that the court does. So I'll go back to my corporate in-house days during that period and talk about some of the things we did there. So when I was in-house, I managed both business folks and also a legal team. And because of the way we were set up and because of some of the things that were implemented, because we were part of a publicly traded company, there were some things that we had to do. One of the things that we were driven to do was talent development in all aspects. So across the board, it covered the lawyers as well. In addition, we were required to do succession planning. So, if something happened to me, I had to have someone who was ready to take my spot. So there was this active effort to develop talent and to get your successor ready to take your role so that you ideally could move on. So you're always pushing someone out of their seat. That was kind of the idea. So as part of that, and before I go on to like the actual things that we did, one of the reasons that we did that, because it was part of this new DEI committee, is we wanted to try and make sure that everyone got an opportunity to do all the things, right? To take on the stretch opportunities, to get the opportunity to present to management. And there really wasn't a good way of objectively doling out those opportunities previously. And so, and I'm going to back up one more story, how all of that came about. There was an ethics complaint that was made. And the ethics complaint was made about the equivalent of a CFO for a division. And the division was pretty significant. It was a $750 million company. So not just a couple million, so a significant division of this company. And the complaint that came in about the CFO was that the perception is that he was not fairly treating all of the employees, not equally giving opportunities. And the perception was this, that he would always give the opportunities to two particular people in his finance team. They always got the stretch opportunities. They always got the opportunities to present to management. They were perceived to be favored as opposed to everybody else. And he would also go to lunch with them all the time. Now, when you talk to him as part of the ethics complaint process, when you talk to him, his explanation was, well, it's not that I favor them. These two people I've worked with for a very long time. They're my go-to people. Often you get last minute crunch projects. He's like, I will trust that it will be done the way I want it to get done. So this concept was that these are just my go-tos. That's why I don't go to anyone else. Well, that ethics complaint drove a complete change in how we approach giving out work and how we share the responsibilities, because it wasn't that he failed because he was making sure that the work got done in the right way, but his failing as a manager was that he was not giving everyone the opportunity, and those people who he perceived couldn't do the work, he was not developing them. So that sort of changed this approach to how we develop talent, how we give opportunities to ensure that everyone got an opportunity across the board. So then going back to what we used to do. So part of talent development, and this was something that I did with the lawyers, because the business people actually had dollar targets that they would have to hit and certain specific quantifiable things that they would have to do. But with the lawyers, we would always put a couple things in place. We would set goals that were business goals to advance the company, and then you'd set personal goals that they would have to do to get to the next level. Like, what are the skill sets do you need to take my job? So we would set those goals every year, and then 6 months we do a check-in, because this was part of our succession planning, right? It was built into the system. We all hated it because it took a great deal of time, but at the end of the day, it really helped everyone succeed because it was set. Everyone had to do it. It was required. So we do a check-in at 6 months to see how everyone was doing on goals, and then at the year end, you would have people report on where they were, and you could kind of see how people were doing, but it was very objective. It forced me as a manager to look at all the things that I had to accomplish and make sure that I was giving everyone an opportunity to do the work, an opportunity to be seen. So my suggestion about all of that is I actually thought it was really good. It was very painful for managers and supervisors, but to ensure that I was including everybody in the work of the company in an equal way, regardless, having that, the criteria that was set, the objectivity of goals that needed to be completed, and then a review process, right? So you actually had metrics that you were working to evaluate how performance was coming along. I actually thought that process was really great in creating a more inclusive work environment with my entire team, because everybody had buy-in to the process. And also making sure that we doled out opportunities equally. So that's one suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That sounds fantastic. It actually is a little bit in line with one of the things I wanted to say, which is, one of the quotes that we have shared in management at Kirton is right along these lines. Is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said, "Good leaders create followers. Great leaders create leaders." And so our goal with associates is to have them develop so that they're going to be our next partners. And we are not there to burn them out. We want them to stay. We want them to come, and we want them to give them every opportunity and all the training and mentorship, whatever they need to be successful. So very similar to that, but that was way more detailed. That's awesome. Like what they did, that's really interesting.
And painful.
Yeah, I'm sure. So thank you for sharing that. That was really interesting. So another thing beyond, I think for us, again, training our associates, giving them great mentorship and great training is for us. I mean, that's that's our lifeblood. We are in the business of people, and our human capital is what we value the most. So we're going to be successful. We know this if we train good people, we mentor them, and put them on the right trajectory to be successful long-term as an attorney. So that is a large piece of it. But some very specific things that we have done, and Barbara was at Kirton when this happened. So she may remember the date because I was a young associate at the time, but I want to say it was 2008, 2009 when we put the balanced hours policy into place. Does that sound about right, Barbara?
Yeah, I do.
So I don't remember, again, I can't remember the exact details of when it was, but I mean, this was something that Kirton in kind of the mid 2000, 2005 to 2010 was talking about. We are not retaining women well. We essentially, Kirton had been hiring for a number of years. Their summer associate classes were essentially half men, half women. But then when you would look at, well, who's actually staying long-term, we were losing a lot of women. And a lot of it was they were not practicing law, or they wanted to practice part-time. That was essentially, when we were looking at it, that was a huge problem for us. So our balanced hours policy that was developed, and it's been changed a little bit, but it was a great policy from the outset. It's been in place for, again, since 2008, 2009. I can't remember the exact date.
I was only 12.
It allows our great talent. Again, we invest so much in our summer associates and in our young associates. And the truth is, men can do it as well. If you, for whatever reason, whatever life circumstance comes about, you cannot work full time, there is a program and policy for you to continue to develop to be a shareholder, to continue to get great training, continue to get great mentorship, and long-term still be successful. And we've had multiple people that have been on that and have come back to being full-time. And then we've also had people that have stayed part-time and have continued on, and we actually have the ability, essentially a balanced hours shareholder program as well. And we're not perfect, we're still working on it, but that is one very specific thing that we have done that has been, again, it's been in place for a long time, but it's taken a lot of time and effort over many years to really cultivate that and really change the culture of like, yeah, this is important, because we want for us to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, to support all of our employees and all of our attorneys to be successful. This policy was something that has helped us a lot.
Thank you so much. And then kind of sticking on that theme, I think we're going to go through and just kind of talk through now some programs or this policy that have been helped you be successful in all these aspects of recruitment, retention, advancement. So let's first start with Barbara and Isabel. Well, like on that point, just what have been some of the programs that you have found that have been successful? And along the line as you're addressing that, just how have law firms and practitioners here in Utah helped, and how can they help in the future to make your students' time in law school and after a success? So Barbara, let's start with you.
Okay. There hasn't been one program. There's been many programs and many efforts. I think one of the things that we have to start with is sort of self-educating, making sure that both law students, professors, faculty, administration, all are focusing on the importance of this. And that includes obviously some training, obviously having some, spectacular educators come in, but also having one of the best programs that I would say is this Achievement Fellow program. And what has happened was since 1920. I keep saying that just to bug you to see if anybody's awake. The truth is, half of you are here just because you're desperate for the CFP. So I'm just like, does anybody can say something? But this achievement program was tremendously important because we saw a desperate economic need for students, and the firms were tremendously generous. And it's a 3-year commitment, and third year is rolling in. And now, at least at the law school, we have 21, achievement fellows, 7 more coming in. They're mentored. We take very close relationship with them. We have socials, we have opportunities to sit down and go through their diversity statement or personal statement, where are you applying, where you should apply, but more importantly, we get to know them at a very succinct level to find out what is it that they are seeking, and then look for ways to connect them. So, that's one aspect of it. The other is every fall, for the last, almost 3 years since I've been at BYU, we have kind of like a working group that all the students are invited, specifically 1Ls, 2Ls, and even 3Ls, and we present areas and opportunities throughout the spectrum. So what opportunities exist in Utah with firms? We've got a link, a website that we're now creating where they're all going to be going to. Not only do you want large firm experience, do you want small firm experience? Do you want public interest experience? Do you want government experience? Do you want non-traditional experience? What organizations are out there that offer scholarship, fellowships, internships? And then we do this early in the fall so that during fall break, or at least during Thanksgiving, in between, Thanksgiving eating, they are already applying, because most of these opportunities have a December or a January deadline. And if they don't start early, finals come in December, everyone is freaked out. By January, grades come, and now you really are freaked out. So we hope to get them early enough where they are really focused on those opportunities. The other program we have is we really encourage our students to pursue mentorships. Now, there are mentorships galore, right? Judicial mentorship, Berkeley mentorship, BYU mentorship, firm mentorships. Whatever mentorship opportunity exists, we really want students to look for ways to connect. Many of our students don't understand, many of us don't even understand, how do we network? It's so weird, you come in, you don't know anyone, and you're like, hi, I'm like Barbara, and this is like my effort to network. Okay, we teach students, how do you connect with people? What should you know when you go to an interview? How do you reach out? What is the concept? I'm talking the psychological concept of networking. Another recruitment, retaining, and really what we call professional development effort is I, as well as my colleagues in career development, for all our 1Ls, we do a session on effective communication. None of this is going to work because we are trying to reach, as we become professionals, across the political spectrum, cultural spectrum, social spectrum, people who don't want to hear the D word diversity, people who are engaged with the idea of diversity. So how do we professionalize our students so that they are better communicators and listeners? And how do we teach cross-cultural competency so that they understand and are not coming from a place of, hi, I'm Billy Bob, what state do you belong to? Or, things that just are not necessarily part of your connection or your networking ability to develop as a professional. And one of the things that we are encouraging our students, we have a clerkship committee that literally steps in if you're interested in a clerkship. And this is where I'm hoping we're going to be pulling Judge Gibson to give us a hand. We step in and we say, what kind of clerkship? What are you doing? There's a clerkship committee that reaches out, that has faculty and those. And one of the things that has been tremendously helpful is literally reaching out to other professionals. I had a conversation, we're on a separate working committee that
why are we always pushing for our students just to do federal clerkships? I mean, why not have them engage in state level clerkships? Where they get in a chance to deal with the judge, to connect, to write, to brief, to research, to see other lawyers. And so we really are now developing this opportunity to have our students, all students are invited. Those students from diverse communities are encouraged as well. How are they successfully navigating the possibilities of law clerkships? And so that's just a little smattering of what we're doing. I have to say there's a ton of other things, but I don't want to take up any more time. Plus, I'm going to admit wholeheartedly and transparently that sometimes things work and sometimes that didn't go too well. And we just have to stop and acknowledge when we make a mistake and when things need to be shifted to make sure that we are providing the service and the development tools for our students rather than for our own egos, right? You know, I don't want to list out all these things that we're doing. I want to list out and recognize the things that we did that, man, maybe that didn't work. Let's try something else, you know? But that gives you sort of a little peppering of it. Okay?
Thanks, Bernard.
Yeah, I will not repeat a lot of what was already said. Yeah, I mean, these are, I would in a way also call them just industry standards for institutions.
Yeah.
We have an obligation to deliver a series and a robust student services and career development programming. And so I think Melinda did a wonderful job to highlight what that can look like. And so we're doing variations of a lot of what she mentioned. But I do want to talk about like maybe some of the challenges, if that helps, which is, you know, I think part of it in a lot of this not just goes to professional development, but also the challenges of finding community and feeling literally a sense of belonging. And so some of the things we try to do is to support our students if they can't find it at the law school, connecting them with other external partners where they are going to find either the mentorship that's appropriate that they're seeking, or just someone that's gone through a similar experience, you know. I mean, and I will say it, right, if I am the only African-American in my class, which has happened and will likely continue to happen, it is very difficult for them to find a person where they can feel like they can come talk to them. And so connecting them with these larger entities where this community might be found, even if it's not exclusively at the law school, because we recognize that with our small enrollment numbers, it doesn't necessarily pan out at the law school. And so becoming informed and maintaining running lists of organizations like UCLE and our internal university partners where we can help our students find these connections and mentorship opportunities. I would say that's probably the most challenging thing, and maybe Melinda can chime in on some of what that might look like, but I would say that's our biggest challenge. And for now, that's kind of been I would say a bridge gap until the university itself and the law school can support a broader sense of community for all members of our enrollment program, right, of our students. But like I said, I don't want to kind of harp on the same programming that Melinda has already kind of outlined.
So Tyler, now we'll turn to you, and you've mentioned the Inclusion Fellowship with Intermountain Health. Can you talk about that a little more, and maybe even some other programs if you'd like to, but just how did that program come about and how it's going, and what do you see the future of that program?
Yeah, so I give all the credit to Intermountain Health on recommending this, quite frankly. So Intermountain Health is a large client of ours, and I happen to work with them on a daily basis. And so they reached out to me knowing that I was the head of the hiring committee 2 years ago and said, hey, we have the idea of we'd like to do some sort of DEI fellowship. And would you like to participate? Would Kirton McConkie be interested? And it was like, absolutely. This is something we are currently working on. How can we be better at this? So let's brainstorm. Let's see what we can do. And it took a number of months, but the truth is, even from the outset, Intermountain's in-house legal team is awesome, and they had a pretty clear vision of certain objectives of what they were trying to accomplish, and they totally aligned with things that Kirton McConkie was trying to do as well. And again, so I guess maybe I should explain exactly what the fellowship is. It's we bring in, last year we brought in one, this year we brought in two students after their 1L year, and they're just part of our summer associate class at Kirton McConkie. But so that seems pretty simple, except the application, it's not sort of your typical application through OCI. It is talking about a lot of the factors that Isabel and Barbara talked about, which is some holistic diversity categories, you know, and that's really what we're looking at. And the truth is, Euclid, Caitlin and John at Euclid are they're essentially the committee for choosing this. So Intermountain Health and Kirton, we participate, but it really is done by Euclid. They prepare the applications and submit it. And part of it is that we do want to make sure that we're meeting the objectives, and it's not, there isn't some underlying thing that somebody at Kirton is able to say, oh yeah, we're kind of, you know, on its face, we're meeting this goal, or we're meeting this goal. We want sort of a third party objective person from the outside helping us. And so that's been fantastic. So 2 years ago, we had a student from BYU after his 1L year join us. And then I guess part of the process, so he's a summer associate, just as if any other summer associate at Kirton McConkie. And it's actually very important for us that those summer associates, they are not treated differently in any way, because we want them, we don't want it to be like, oh, they got here because of this. It's like, no, they're here, they're part of our summer associate class. And we're going to give them the same training, the same mentorship, the same benefits that we give all of our summer associates, because we want them to be successful at Kirton McConkie. And that is a really important piece of what we're trying to do. But the added benefit with Intermountain Health is that we also, last summer, the fellow spent 2 weeks of the summer at the end of our summer associate program with Intermountain Health's in-house legal department, just working. So they got the regular experience with, you know, as a Kirton McConkie summer associate, but then they also had the opportunity to be in-house at Intermountain for 2 weeks and get a sense of what the in-house, you know, jobs and opportunities look like. This summer, we've tweaked it a little bit. We have 2 fellows, and essentially it's between 1 and 3 hours a week. They go to Intermountain Health and work on projects or join calls with the in-house legal team. And so what we essentially are trying to accomplish is we also have these 2 individuals get involved in projects where they will see the project from an outside counsel attorney. So maybe it would be something that would be assigned to me and they will help me with it. But then they will also see that same project from the in-house attorney and how the project came in from business folks and how they decide where they're going to send it and just all of those internal things. So it's been a really cool opportunity for these fellows to see, again, they're getting the Kirton McConkie summer associate experience, but then also getting this really neat benefit from Intermountain Health. And I think Intermountain Health's in-house legal department is 40 or 50 attorneys as well. So they're a decent sized law firm in and of themselves. And they get this really cool opportunity to see what is it that they do on a day-to-day basis. Plus, you know, most of their time is spent with us at Kirton McConkie.
And so now moving to Judge Gibson. So we're going to let's have you talk a little bit about the Common Thread program, and kind of what that is, what it's trying to accomplish, how that interacts and with the other various judicial pipeline programs already going on, and just maybe what you see where it going in the future and how others can get involved.
So, wow, that's
Sorry, that's a lot
that
there.
is compound. Can I object? Sustained. So with regard to Common Thread, this is a brand new program. It was kicked off last year, and currently there's a committee that's putting all of the pieces to build this program up. So the goal of Common Thread is to create a bench that's more closely reflective of our community. That's one goal. The second is also to just increase the interest in becoming a judge, and to do that in a way where you approach everybody through the entire span of their career, starting from law school, try to spark an interest there, all the way up to the most experienced attorneys in all different areas and practices. So and I tried to articulate, because we've not really built out the program, but I put together 4 main goals as I see it with regard to the program, and I'll talk about a couple of them in depth. First, spark an interest. Second, provide some education and some useful information with regard to the judicial process, how you become a judge, application, interview, etc. In addition, create some opportunities for law students and then also others to work in the different areas of court. And I know that there's a lot of appellate clerkships. There's not so many state trial court clerkships, which I'm always surprised at, because had I known, I really wanted to be a litigator. So I was at Parsons for 10 years and did litigation, did trial work. But had I known, I probably would have gone and worked for a state court judge, because you actually see everything. You actually can see lawyers do it right, do it wrong. You see all sorts of motions. Anyway, it's just a great opportunity. So trying to give more people that opportunity to work in state court, have opportunities to network, mentorship, and also talk about the practicalities of what it is like to be a judge, right? On a day-to-day basis, some of the benefits and the opportunities you get as a judge, and then also, the stuff that people care about, like the pay. Let's talk about that. So I'm going to back up a little bit. One of the most important components of this is really to sort of remove some of the mystery behind the judicial process, and also try to mitigate some of the anxiety to the extent we can in going through the process to apply. So a component part of the program would be discussing, the application. What does that look like? How do your skills and experience and community service and et cetera, how does that play in? Walk through the interview process and some of the questions you could be asked. I mean, I don't know that anyone, and including me, I never thought about what my judicial philosophy would be until I decided I wanted to become a judge. And then, it's probably helpful to know that that might be a question that you would be asked, so that you can think about what it would be. And then in addition, like I said, giving you the opportunity to have more contact with judges, work with judges, and then providing more just transparent information about, the day-to-day life of the judge. So that's really what the program is about. The program is not excluding anyone. It's really available to everyone. Like I said, the goal is really to make the program or to help make our bench more reflective of the community. So yes, there is an aspect of it where we want to increase diversity, but diversity is fairly broad. I mean, I would tell you that I'm actually considered diverse, but not for the reason you think. I'm diverse because I had 10 years of in-house corporate counsel experience, and I don't know that there are many other judges who have that. So I say that, diversity is and should be defined fairly broadly, because what we're looking for is background, experience, perspectives. There's so many things that make different individuals diverse. With regard to how it interplays, I know that there's a lot of different things going on in all of the different groups to increase diversity and also diversity and inclusion. This program, which focuses really on the judiciary, I hope to work with and collaborate with all of the different groups: women lawyers, minority bar, UCLE, the Disability Law Center. So all of the different groups, to the extent that they are moving forward in trying to create judicial pipelines, we want to work with them. I don't want to recreate what they do, take over what they do. It's really collaboration, and hopefully to piggyback on what they're already doing. The Common Thread program, what we're doing right now to develop it is we're looking at what's already being done. out there, and then identifying what the need is. Are there certain areas where we can fill gaps and provide additional information? Is there education that we can put in place? What is the information and how do we deliver it? And then how do we set up the mentoring, the networking, the clerkships to affect all of that? And like I said, ideally, it would truly be a pipeline, spark the interest in a law student, get young lawyers interested and maybe talk to them about what skill set is really needed. I lucked out. I spent 10 years doing litigation. So I did trial work, and I went 10 years in-house. So I lucked out. My skill set was in line, even though I'm diverse because of that corporate attorney background. But it would be helpful if someone identified that they wanted to be a judge. You could talk to them about what their skill set is and maybe give them some ideas for expanding that, right, to make them more competitive. So that's what the program is doing right now. Like I said, we're brainstorming, identifying what's already out there so that we don't reinvent the wheel, seeing what programs we can add to, and then coming up with our own program that would be from start to finish. And with regard to success and whether or not this program is going to be successful, it will be, but I think what it requires is a few things. I think it has to have the buy-in of the legal community and all of the different stakeholders. And that includes the judiciary, our bar, the legal community. There has to be some consistency in it too. Once we build the program, it's not like you build it and you're done. You build it, it has to be managed. You have to have that commitment. It has to be adaptable because it may change. Some groups or people who we consider diverse today may not be the same groups who are diverse 5 years from now. So it has to be able to adapt and evolve as we move through time. And then ideally, you all also put in tangible goals so that we can track our progress to see if something's working. If not, then you have to be able to tweak and make that change. But I think it's something that's really necessary. I think it will just elevate everybody and hopefully spark an interest in everyone across the board in these positions and just create, just bigger and more qualified pool of judicial candidates, and hopefully, increase the diversity as well.
Thank you, and I apologize again for my questions within a question. So, thank you all for our panelists. Just remaining about 10 minutes, we have time for answering any questions. Like I said, we can monitor the online, but if anyone in the room as well.
One of the bad things about lawyers, they have a bad reputation for being difficult people. And I think professionalism, of course, we all talk about it, but we don't all practice it. What is there? I have had experience where there was one woman in the firm who wanted to, she was going to have a baby and she wanted to take some family leave. And her supervisor, another female lawyer, said, well, that isn't what we do, because we have to do the same that the men do, and you can't do that because you are going to let us down. These kinds of cultural issues pervade some of our relationships. And I would hope that we're teaching professionalism in addition to inclusion, because I've never thought that being a difficult personality was an aspect of leadership or success, but in many places it is.
I would say they are one and the same. When I focus on what I want to inspire our students to learn, I want to elevate their professionalism so they can have the tough conversations with people who disagree with them. And to be able to engage in those conversations at a professional, respectful manner, there you are elevating the legal profession. If we rewind the clock 40 years ago, 30 years, let me see, 28 years, 29 years ago, 1920. If we rewind the clock, when mediation first hit the legal community, everybody's like, mediation, whatever, that's so dumb, we're litigators, we're here to, but the truth is now mediation is the norm, right? So if we continue to elevate the conversation, especially when we disagree, especially when we come from different ends of the political spectrum, when we come from different backgrounds, if we can teach our students that, and then all of you as you're stepping in and maybe stepping out of the profession can continue to have those conversations respectfully, then even by your own actions, you're being inclusive because you're allowing diverse conversations to take place. It goes, what is that book? Everything I learned in kindergarten. Be nice to one another, even when you disagree. Allow disagreements to take place so that I can learn more from you and you can learn more from me. And that's why when I talk to our students about cross-cultural competency, I'm not talking about cross-cultural if this is a different culture. I'm talking about they just have a different perspective. How do you listen better? And how do you communicate better? That will make a better professional.
And I'm just going to chime in. I think everyone needs to not be afraid to have those conversations too. You have to sometimes just take those topics head on. Otherwise, it will never be addressed.
Yeah, I would say that having difficult conversations and making requests is not necessarily a reflection of professionalism, but rather these are new spaces for folks and how do we navigate those conversations. In my space, we always tell folks, you have to look for the spaces where you feel you believe you're going to be comfortable, and sometimes that's not going to be at our school. That's maybe not going to be at BYU. That's the reality. I think there's this fallacy that we're just car salesmen out there and trying to recruit folks, and because we just have to get all of these people to apply. But the reality is that not everyone's going to feel comfortable in our institution for a variety of reasons. Sometimes that's I will say the culture that's out there in the world. Utah has a reputation for a specific kind of culture, and maybe parts of those are true, and some folks don't want to immerse themselves in that space. And so I would say too, even with our career development and things like that, it's important for our students to go to a place where they're going to feel comfortable and understood and feel like they perhaps maybe in a benefits way, like if we're talking about benefits, that they're going to have the access to the benefits they feel like are important for the life they also want to live. And maybe that's not welcoming information, but it is important to discuss, right? It is important for that person, in our instance, for the student who's may or may not enroll in our program to feel comfortable in our institution.
I'm going to add one more thing. Just something popped up. So how about everyone focus on creating a workplace where someone who is diverse, and maybe you don't know that they are, that they feel comfortable coming to you to ask you to make some type of accommodation for them, right? How about having that type of a workplace? And I think the only way that you have that is it has to be driven from the top down. These goals have to be priorities. You have to have objective criteria and goals that you work on, and you have to hold yourself accountable to them. But I mean, if we all worked towards that, where, say you have a disabled lawyer who needs assistance in drafting, right? Or needs a dictaphone, like, how comfortable would it be for them to be able to just say, hey, can I get a dictaphone, versus having to struggle to try and accommodate their own disability without talking to you. And I'll just be transparent. You know, when I was a young associate at Parsons, and this was a long time ago, I graduated law school in '96. You know, we were still having discussions about whether I should wear a skirt to court. And the first several years, I always wore a skirt to court. That was when I started. And I never thought, and not because of the people I worked for, but you sort of feel that there's this mindset with regard to how a lawyer has to work in a large firm. You don't make requests for any accommodations. You have to do it the way the men have done it for the last 100 years, right? I mean, that was sort of the expectation. And through no fault of Parsons, but that was my own perhaps insecurity and how I thought about it. But how about we change that entire mindset? Why don't we have workplaces where we make it comfortable for everyone, including lawyers, to make a request without it looking poorly upon them, that they don't have work ethic, that they don't want to be partners, right? Or having them taken off of some type of track. How about that? Just being able to ask the question. You can always say no or say no, but just having someone be able to ask, I think that would change our entire legal profession.
We have time for maybe one more question if there is one. Okay. So I think we're just gonna, if everyone just wants to take like maybe a quick minute, just to, if you have any final concluding remarks that you'd like to leave with the audience today. If you'd like, if you're not, it's okay.
We all look at
That's
that.
great.
Great.
This is great. Thanks. I learned a lot. I mean, this was wonderful. These are fantastic. I mean, grateful to be with all of you. This has been awesome. Yeah, I would say again, I can just speak from my experience. I've been at Kirton McConkie for 15 years. And it's DEI is important to Kirton, and it has been for a long time. And we have failed in a bunch of things in the past, and we're trying to do better. And I think that's been something that I think culturally at our firm has been good to acknowledge, like, hey, we've tried some things, you know, Barbara mentioned, hey, we've tried some things that have not worked. You know, it's like, oh, well, we need to hire at least half of our summer class needs to be women. That's great. Well, it didn't result in half of our partners being women. Well, okay, well then what do we need to try? What is the next thing we need to work on? And we've been very open in recent years to trying new things and partnering with Euclid and other organizations to be like, how can we be better, to get ideas from other firms, get ideas from the law school. And I would say we have been the great beneficiary of Euclid, BYU Law School, Utah Law School, and other firms and clients around town that have helped us to say, hey, these are our goals. How have you addressed this? How have you gotten better at this? And that's something that we're still working on.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming and being interested in the topic, even if it's just to check your CLE off. But thank you all for being here.
I echo Jeff Gibson. Not only are you here, but you're there, Zoom people, and you're getting your CLE, but hopefully in between everything else you're doing, I hope you have a broader perspective on how we can elevate the legal profession here in the state of Utah, and what we can do individually, collaboratively, and as a community to be more representative and be willing to step into those uncomfortable zones to just learn a little more. Thank you.
I would certainly agree with everything that's been said. These conversations are important, and we shouldn't be, I would say we should be open to approaching them in a way that it's not threatening to our being and to ourselves. Because it's not coming, I don't think, from that space. At least I've had these conversations of what feels like 100 times. And unfortunately, I would say that those of us engaging in the conversations, quote unquote, look a certain way. And I think it's so important that
everyone in the profession is open to having and engaging in these conversations.
Thank you so much, and I thank our panelists and thank you all for joining us. I failed to mention at the first, the series is a collaboration between Euclid, but also Inclusion Strategies and the Utah State Bar. And also want to recognize our sponsors for this year, Euclid sponsors for our CLEs, and that is the firms of Rick, Quinney and Nevercur, Buckhalter, and SF firm. And like I said, this is a series. This is number 3 of 4, the 4 series. Look forward to seeing that sometime in Q4 of this year. So thank you all.
Nice to meet you.
See you around town. So what was the company that you were at that you already know?
ATK.
Okay.
And then I worked with them and we did the spin merge
Sure.
and part of it merged with Orbital. And then I came back.
Oh
from
my
business to Alphalands. To be headquartered here. I was living in Lacey at the time. Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember, what was his name? It used to be I was at law school.
Mike